that we started out with, we're going to make a 50 watt amp, but then I became more intrigued with a 30 watt amp, because for what I'm doing now, a lot of club gigs and even bigger gigs, that's about as much power as I really need, to be frank with you. And I really like being able to open the amp up, have the master volume on 10 as much as possible. But at the same time, every 30 watt amp I had played through in the past, I felt like was lacking a little bit of bottom end, or got mushy on the bottom end. So we started from the ground up. These are completely original circuits. The 30 and the 50 are two unique circuits. It's not like we took bigger power tubes and put them on the same circuit and made a 50 watt amp. They're different from the ground up. They're the only PRS amps that have tube rectifiers in them. So we really tried to hit the sweet spot in several different ways. The sweet spot of how much gain is in the amp, the sweet spot of where the top end is. I can usually tell in an amplifier in 2 seconds or not whether I'm gonna bond with it or make it warm enough to where it doesn't hurt my ears. There are a lot of amps out there, and I'm not gonna name names, it doesn't matter where you put the treble control, to me, it seems harsh. And then the other sweet spot was the amount of natural compression that the amp will have. In the past, I've used certain amps in the studio that had a lot of great natural compression from a tube rectifier, cathode bias, class A, whatever, that when I got them out on the gig, they just kind of caved in. And consequently, I think one of the things that can make like a 50 watt Marshall harder to mic is that it doesn't have as much natural compression. So we try to find the sweet spot in all those three areas: the top end, the gain structure, and in the natural compression. And the tube rectifier allowed us to get a little bit of the right amount of sag. And then we spent 3 years trying to nail all this down. And Doug and I would convene about every 3 months and talk on the phone a couple times a week, as you know, to kind of look at our progress. And the way it really went down was he would come to Texas, and we would he'd bring a starting point, and we'd listen, and I would have some comments, and then I would drag out the 50 watt Plexi or the Tweed Deluxe or the AC30 or whatever and say, listen to how this amp does this one thing. How do we make that happen, and then combine it with the bottom end in this 50 watt Marshall? You know, how do we get the mid-range of the Vox? How do we get the microphone friendliness of the Tweed Deluxe? Combine it with the bottom end, the tight bottom end. How do we get the tight bottom end, but the warm top end that doesn't hurt, the thick notes on the top? And that's when I designed this guitar, that was really one of my main goals, was to get tight bottom strings, but warm fat string tone on the top. So the guitar took 25 years because that's how long I've been with the company, and I didn't start on, I really felt like it was the culmination of all the time I've been playing these guitars. The amp division is obviously a lot younger, so we didn't have as much time, but we crammed about 25 years worth of work into about 3 years. And man, I don't know, I'm pretty knocked out with it. And my approach, the other thing we did was, that I really need to mention, is that we changed the speaker cabinet, the stock PRS speaker cabinet. We designed our own speaker cabinet to complement the amp. And we took out the baffle that's in the middle of the cabinet, and then we designed a different back panel, which they're not technically ports, but they are ports in a way. They're round cutouts behind each speaker, but they have grill cloth on them. So in effect, what happens is they're small enough to where they retain the bottom end that I want, but they let some sound go out the back. And so on a smaller stage, or even on a bigger stage, the sound seems to come from different places as opposed to just hitting the back of my legs. And also I noticed the people that are in the front row of these small clubs that I play, and I apologize to you guys right now, you may not agree with this, but I play a lot of smaller clubs, and I crank this thing up, actually a little louder than I'm going to play it today. And I never see anybody grab their ears. Nobody's going like this, it's too loud, they get up and leave, and none of that. So again, sometimes with these 212 cabinets, you can be like a tractor beam of too much volume straight at the people in your direction. The lucky folks that are right here. But that was the philosophy, is to pretty much try to get everything great in all the vintage amps that I had loved over the years, but put it in a smaller package, make it more user-friendly, and make it equally musical on gigs and on sessions. And I mean, once we got pretty much the final version nailed down, 90% there a year and a half ago. It's all the only amps I've been using, 100-something gigs and probably 50 record dates that I've been on, and I've used them on the whole thing. I have a new record coming out in 2 weeks, and I didn't use any other amps on the whole record. So my approach, if you've heard me talk about PRS amps before, is that I generally start with a tone where when I play aggressively, I get a nice amount of crunch, a real crunchy rhythm tone. And then when I back the volume knob off or play a little bit lighter, it cleans up really nice. And from there, I use pedals. I use a clean boost pedal and then an overdrive pedal to take it to, I just think of them as the next channel, which I personally prefer to a channel switching amp, because I feel like it lets me keep the integrity of the organic tone. The bottom end stays the same. So, and then I have to just add that yesterday a dealer told me, Doug and I were talking to a dealer that said he had a customer who said that the amp doesn't have enough gain. And I don't know, do some people use feathers for picks? I don't know. But I want to show you the way I have the amp right now is that the master volume is on about 7.5 or 8. And there's still plenty of room to go volume-wise and output stage distortion, but I don't want to, in this echo chamber here, go over the top, even though there is some nice electronic dance music happening next door. And I've got the channel volume on about, almost straight up. So obviously there's tons more places to go with the amount of gain in the amp. And I'm going to turn the guitar all the way up and hit a chord, as I was talking about, aggressively. Where I come from, that's not really what we call a clean tone. So I think it has enough gain. You can get a hell of a lot more gain than that out of the amp. But the beauty of it is, and it's I don't know how much, is that killing you? No, you okay? You're all right? You're shell-shocked, but you're okay. All right. So from that, having an amp that has the touch sensitivity and the compression, kind of that, the sweet spots that we were looking for, to be able to go from, turn it down to 6 or 7, to really, to me, that's a rhythm tone I use a lot. And it allows me to get it's not clean, it's just barely breaking up, but, the top end doesn't go away, it doesn't get cloudy. It's from there, if I want to, I'm not touching the controls on the amp. On this particular guitar, which I happen to find quite versatile, I find it so versatile that I put my initials on it. I can go to the tap mode here and get a really rich, clean tone. And in my experience with recording clean tones has been that the best ones, in my experience, always still have that harmonic content in them. I see a lot of studio players who have great tone over the years, they've used like AC30s that are barely turned on. And it's a clean tone, but it still has a lot of harmonic content in it. And that's what we tried to have throughout the range of settings. Any way you set this amp is to have that real rich harmonic quality to it, which also makes it easier to record. So back to the humbucking mode, here's the neck pickup just with. I just turned the treble of about half a thing. But not touching the amp again, going back to humbucking, here I am. I just turned down to about 7.5 right there. So from there, if I want to take a solo, I can turn on an overdrive pedal or a boost pedal. So I'll show you the boost pedal first, which I could sort of call my second channel, or however you want to look at it. It's just a clean boost. It's an Exotic Effects EP booster, which I have found there's something about it that gives me a little more than just a clean boost. And if you really want to know if you're a gear nerd like me, you might want to know that on the inside there's some dip switches, and I put the treble into the vintage position. So when I hit that thing, I'm hitting the front end of the amp just a little bit harder, but I'm not changing anything else.
And clean feedback was something I really like.
So you hear it doesn't really change the inherent tone that I had going. It just makes it, it's kind of like walking back to the amplifier and turning the amp up a notch. But it's quite a bit different in terms of the amount of sustain that I can get out of when I'm taking a solo. So I use that quite a bit. That's sort of my next step up. From there, if I want a little more overdrive, I have an overdrive pedal that sounds a little, obviously, more overdriven. Again, it's that sustain, that clean sustain that, and I say clean because it doesn't sound like a fuzz tone. It's kind of the Duane Allman at Fillmore East, when you hear "You Don't Love Me" when they play that, and it breaks down, and he just holds a note, and the upper harmonic comes in, and that's what we're going for. Harmonics, clean, rich. I always thought that the hardest thing to find in an amp was to get that clean sustain, and I don't mean just for a second, but to go into that upper harmonic thing. So again, here's the overdrive. that, I mean, that's a lot of overdrive right there, you know, and that I'm not putting that much overdrive through the pedal, but it's just enough. Again, when you have an amp, do we have some, is my voice distorting? Hello? When you have an amp that is super responsive like that, I'm hallucinating. That it doesn't take a whole lot to make something really, you know, different happen. So, again, I just want you to hear where I started on that. Kind of hitting fairly, not you know, here's all the way. Here's the next notch up. And then here's the overdrive. Channel 4 is both. So, I mean, to me, it has just been, it's just, I get a better lead 2-channel amp, a 4-channel amp this way, but without the foundation of all the work that Doug put in translating my wants, needs, desires, my dream amp, it would never happen. And I know that seems really loud if you're sitting right here, but it's really cool to go play club gigs where there's, you know, 150 people sitting really in close proximity, and people send me an email and say, you know what, man, I gotta tell you, at first I thought it was gonna be really, really loud, and then we were able to actually talk, and it didn't hurt, and it was really cool. So, you know, if you need to turn your master volume down lower than 5, you need to go to a different amplifier. But you know, on this amp, I can pretty much go down to 5 and it'll still be musical. But at the 30 watt level, I can also turn it up to 10. In most situations I'm in, at least the master, I don't want the channel volume all the way up to 10, and get away with it and let the amp really breathe. And that's where an amp really sounds good, is if it's allowed to open up a fair amount. And I find that two of the comments I get from people most often is, what about an effects loop? And I find that a lot of times people that aren't professional players, they use way too much gain, and on their delay settings, they use way too much, on the mix knob, the way too much delay. So they get this trashed out, distorted delay thing, and they say, well, my delay sounds like crap. And I'm like, well, there's a knob on there that says mix, turn that down a little bit, turn your volume down, and then turn your master up a little bit, and your whole tone will get fat and big relative to where you're running it. So that's always been my approach, but I've never had an amp, whether it's the 30 or the 50, which we don't have enough time to talk about the 50, but it gets to the same place in a different way. It's just a lot. It's a full-blown adult amplifier I don't want to unleash in here. It's a badass 50 watt amp, but I've never had amps that were this responsive and across the board versatile, and as musical as this. So this guy right here, give him a hand for me, because he made it all happen.
Well, I gotta admit, we've poured way more harmonic content into these models than I normally do. It's kind of a terrifying thing for an amp designer to pour so much. You can hear so much going on whenever I hear him play. It always reminds me, it's like, God, there's so much extra stuff going on it enhances the notes and everything. But that it's like high octane fuel or something. It's like in the hands of a person that can, that can use that kind of harmonic content. It's just like angel singing, and so it's kind of a scary thing to put so much of that into an amp. A lot of times you want a more even kind of a situation, and the harmonics aren't like modulating against each other and that type of thing. But this amp, we let it all out with David's amp, and it's just you can hear it in there, and every time I hear it, it just takes my breath away. The amount of harmonics that are just jumping around everywhere.
But I also want to add real quick that you don't have to be. I mean, I think an amp, personally, I feel like an amp like this allows any player to sort of improve their ability to use their hands to get tone out of the guitar, which is where it really happens. I mean, what goes on right here is way more important than what's on my pedal board. And so when you have an amp that is really responsive, I think it can help any player sort of learn how to use their hands to manipulate it. And if you look at any great guitar player, they have a real they have a real command of the instrument. If you watch their hands, they're not sitting here like in a Mel Bay Book 1 where they tell you your thumb must remain behind here and you must up down strokes and the whole time, and picking up around here, it's like, watch Pete Townsend, how aggressively he plays it. I met Billy Gibbons when I was 18 years old, and he said, man, he goes, I just keep the guitar turned up all the way and keep my hand anchored right here. And that was back when Billy he wasn't using really light strings or anything, and I would go see him play, and it would just be that. I would go see him play with that aggression, and I was like, it would put chills down me. But so while you need to have a certain amount of proficiency to bring that out, the amp itself also, let's face it, we have to put in the time and practice. But for me, at least, to have the right tools help me realize to get what I hear in my head out through the speakers, and I think that can help the average player learn more about this whole idea of tone is in our hands. And with that, I think we're out of time.
Well, we're out of time, but we can take a couple of questions maybe real quick.
Yeah.
David?
Whatever.
Anybody?
What's the distortion model?
The distortion pedal is called a Telos pedal. It's made by a guy in Memphis, Tennessee. His company is called Psionic Audio, Psionic. He doesn't have enough money to build anymore right now. It's a great pedal. It has an amazing buffer on it, which is really great in terms of put it first in your pedal board, keeps the integrity of your tone. It's like plugging straight into the amp. No effects loop. No effects loops. Yes?
What's the name of the amp model?
This is a DG Custom 30. And there's a DG Custom 50, which is a whole nother circuit. It reacts the same way, but it gets there in a much different fashion. Yes? I'm sorry? They're vintage 30 Celestions. We tried 12, 15 other speakers. It was very enlightening. We thought that Celestion has a new speaker called a Creamback, which is supposed to be like the Greenback 25, but it'll take more power. I got those in the cabinet, and I thought, this is it. There's no doubt about it. I called Doug. I was fired up. And then I went out and played 3 gigs with them. And by the end of the 3rd gig, they sounded like old speakers. So again, the process of real-world testing all this stuff is crucial. I mean, and I'm not putting my name on anything until I go out and do that. But if I hadn't, you hear how I play. I mean, the speakers are going to get broken in pretty quick. But if I hadn't gone out and really run them through the ringer for just, it's only 3 gigs, they started to deteriorate. I'd have gone with them in a heartbeat. If I'd gone over to Celestion and said, we're going to pick our speakers today, that's what you'd be hearing today. But by going out and playing just a few gigs, I could, like Doug says, we vet all this stuff and we troubleshoot it and try to get it all out of the way before it gets to you. I wanted to find something different than vintage 30s. I really did. But at the end of the day, it's the most consistent speaker. It's kind of a neutral speaker in a way. People say, well, it's got all these high mids and everything. But for me, it has enough tight bottom end, and the top end is not too harsh. And over time, it continues to perform.
Is that mic right now?
No.
Wow.
I mean, there is a mic on it, but it's probably just bleeding through here.
What tubes come with it?
They're a military version of an EL-84, which there's 4 of them, and a GC-34 tube rectifier.
So it's an Acer. Is it like a class A type?
It's cathode bias, which apparently, according to Doug, is not exact. It's different than Class A. It's cathode bias, so that if one tube goes out, the amp will still work. And it's got an amazingly great feature on these amps is that you can self-bias, you can't bias a cathode bias amp, but you can monitor the bias. If something starts to sound weird, just with a simple voltmeter, you can push it in the holes in the back, find out which tube is going bad, and replace that one tube, and it allows you to really keep a handle on what's going on with your amp.
And Doug, feel free to jump in. Can you replace it with a solid state rectifier, or would you want to?
It's set up with a GZ34 right now, so a solid state rectifier would probably work. We have cranked these amps up pretty tight. We've wound them up pretty tight, so I would recommend keeping it just like it is.
I don't think. You're not going to get. I mean, trust me, it's not unless you think it's terribly. If you think it's really too mushy, I'd get a different amp. But I worked really hard to make sure it's not too mushy. I mean, like I said, you could if I told you I had a solid state rectifier in it, you might not, you might think, yeah, that sounds like a solid state rectifier, It's just on that, but it just got that little bit of extra sweetness on the top end from the tube rectifier.
You see carbon compositors and things like that?
No, we didn't do carbon comps, carbon films, carbon comps. With the way this would have set up, it would have been a lot of hiss. Would have heard a lot more going on like that, right? With that, it was a selection kind of early. It was a clarity of balancing. Carbon comps warm things up in a certain way, and we were doing it with other things. It was interesting the way we designed it. We had 2 equal amps. We would try something on this amp and compare it back and forth. And then we would go back to the original. Or we would try something on this amp, and then it sounded better, and we'd bring this one up to par. We did that over a period of 3 years, like a ladder. And at the end of the thing, he had 2 kind of equal amps, but we were able to A/B that way, because it's hearing, if you modded something and then said, well, did it sound better? We literally did it like a ladder, and it was kind of an interesting process.
We pretty much, we would work all day and come back the next day to see where we ended. We thought we nailed it, and every single time we came back the next day, we realized that we were one step beyond, that our ears had kind of fatigued, and we needed to back it off to that place we were one notch back. Are you up? Is somebody else getting ready to do a demo? Because if they are, we want to get out of here.
Yeah, we're out.
Okay, we're done. Thank you.